Welcome to Interface Studies. My name is Saleh.
The sociability is really rather important. We found that the proportion of people in groups can tell you a number of things. The most used plazas tend to have a higher proportion of people in twos and threes than the less successful ones. But the most sociable plazas also have, in absolute numbers, the greatest number of individuals. A busy place, for some reason, seems to be the most congenial kind of place if you want to be alone or talk, this man is, to oneself. The number one activity is people looking at other people, but it is a point that is overlooked in many, many designs.
Stand in a good public square for long enough and you'll start to notice rules that nobody wrote down. People sit where they can see and be seen. They drift towards the edges and then towards each other. A space fills up not because it is empty and waiting, but because there are already people in it. And people, turns out, are the main thing that attracts people. In the 1970s, the urbanist William Whyte set up cameras over the plazas of New York and watched. The result, published in 1980 as The Social Life of Small Urban Spaces, is a catalogue of how strangers arrange themselves when left alone. Years before that, Jane Jacobs had described something close to it on the pavement. She argued that a busy block looks after itself because everyone on it is visible to everyone else, and that visibility does quiet work. You behave a little differently when you can be seen and when you know that the people around you can see that you can see them. Let's hold on to that, because it is in fact the oldest answer to the question this video is about. What makes something social? Long before any of this touched the screen, the answer had to do with being visible to one another and being answerable because of it. In our story, software arrived and took the word. Somewhere around the middle of the 2000s, social stopped being a quality you might notice in a room and became a category of product. Social software, social media, the social web. And once the word was doing that job, most of us stopped asking what it meant. We knew a social app when we saw it. It had profiles and friends and a feed. The awkward part is that by the time the industry settled on the word, social already had several careful definitions held by different groups of people who studied this for a living. Those definitions did not agree. They were not rough drafts of one another. They were separate ideas about what the word named. There are at least four of them, and this video is a tour through all four, ending with what happened when one of them won. Let's start with being able to see each other. The oldest of the technical definitions comes from a field with an unglamorous name. In 1984, Irene Greif of MIT and Paul Cashman of Digital Equipment Corporation ran a small workshop in Cambridge, Massachusetts, for people interested in how computers might support groups of people working together. They needed a label for the gathering, and the one they coined stuck. Computer Supported Cooperative Work, or CSCW. It became a whole research community, with its own conferences and its own quarrels, all circling one question. When you put a group of people into a shared system, what does the software have to do so that they can actually act as a group? The sharpest answer to come out of that tradition was published in the year 2000 by Thomas Erickson and Wendy Kellogg, both then at IBM's research labs. Their paper is called Social Translucence, and the idea behind it is incredibly simple, especially when you see it. Go back to the public square. The reason people coordinate so well in physical space is that they can see each other and the traces of what each other is doing. You can tell when a shop is busy by looking through the window. You slow down at a doorway because you see someone coming the other way. None of this requires anyone to send a message. The information is just there, in the open, and everyone can see that everyone else can see it. Ericsson and Kellogg argued that you could build digital systems with the same property. They named three ingredients: visibility, so that what people are doing is perceptible to others; awareness, so that you understand what those visible signs mean; and accountability, which is the one that does the real work. Because if I can see you and you know that I can see you, both of us behave with the other in mind. The use of the term translucence was deliberate because there's a permanent tension between being visible and keeping some privacy. A good social system holds that tension rather than resolving it in one direction. On this definition, an interface is social when it lets people perceive one another well enough to be answerable to one another. Now, when it comes to features like the like, the follower count, the read receipt, none of those exist yet in this account. Social is not a feature you bolt on. It is a property of whether people can see each other at all. The second definition was written down almost as an act of housekeeping. It was by two researchers in 2007, Dana Boyd and Nicole Ellison. They both tried to define the thing everyone was suddenly talking about back then. Their paper, Social Network Sites, Definition, History, and Scholarship, set out three features that made a site one of these new objects. You build a profile inside a bounded system, you articulate a list of other people you are connected to, and you can look at your connections and walk along theirs. That third part is the heart of it. The novelty was not that you could meet people. The novelty was that your web of relationships, the one you already had, became something you could see laid out and walk through. Your friends and your friends' friends made visible and clickable. Boyd and Ellison were so insistent on this that they picked a fight over a single word. Everyone was calling these things social networking sites. The two of them refused, and they called them social network sites instead. They dropped the ing. The reasoning was precise. Networking suggests going out and meeting strangers, initiating new relationships, working a room. But that was not what most people were doing. People were mostly mapping the connections they already had. Their friends from school, the colleagues, the family. The site made an existing network visible. It did not, for the most part, manufacture a new one. Notice what has happened. The first careful definition of social in this field was already an argument that the popular word was slightly wrong. The thing was social, on this account, because it made the structure of your relationships into something you could see and traverse, not because of contact and not because of conversation, but because of shape. The third definition does not come from software at all. It comes from a 1923 essay on language and meaning, and it is the one that explains the part of social media that can feel the most pointless. The essay drew a line around a kind of talk we all use and rarely notice. A great deal of human speech, it pointed out, carries no information at all. Remarks about the weather, asking how someone is when you do not really want the medical history, the small noises people make to fill a silence. It gave this a name: phatic communion. The word phatic just means speech whose job is contact, not content. The point is not to transmit anything. The point is the contact itself. In 2008, a sociologist at the University of Kent called Vincent Miller picked this idea up and pointed it straight at the new media of the moment. His paper, New Media, Networking, and Phatic Culture, argued that a large share of what people were doing online was phatic, the status update that says nothing in particular, the poke, the like. None of these carry much content. All of them say the small thing the weather remark says: I am still here. I am thinking of you. The line is open. On this definition, an interface is social when it gives people cheap, constant ways to maintain contact without having to say anything in particular. And this is worth taking seriously rather than sneering at. Phatic contact is not failed communication, it is its own thing, and humans have always done a lot of it. The interfaces that thrived were often the ones that made it easiest. A button you can press in half a second to tell someone you saw them is, on this account, one of the most social things you can build. The fourth definition is the commercial one, and it is the one most of us actually absorbed, because it came with the products. It also arrives with a history that rhymes with everything else here, because the label itself was going to mean something else entirely. The phrase came first, and it came from a designer. In April 1999, user experience writer Darcy DiNucci published a short piece in print magazine called Fragmented Future, and she is generally credited as the first to put Web 2.0 into print. But she did not mean what it later came to mean. She was looking at a web that still lived inside a browser window on a desktop machine. She was predicting that it would not stay there. The web would be understood as a transport mechanism, the ether through which interactivity happens. Something that would show up not just in a browser, but on your television, car dashboard, your phone, maybe a microwave. Her Web 2.0 was about the web breaking out of the browser and spreading across devices. It was a forecast about where the web would be, not about what we would do with it. Then the phrase sat mostly unused for 5 years, until O'Reilly Media took it as the name for a conference in 2004. And in 2005, the publisher, Tim O'Reilly, wrote the essay that fixed its meaning for good. His central phrase was the network as platform. The web was no longer a set of pages you read. It was becoming a place you did things, where the software improved the more people used it, and where the users supplied the raw material. He had another phrase for the mechanism: an architecture of participation. Build the thing so that ordinary use produces value. Every review, every upload, every tag, every link is a contribution. And the contributions accumulate into something no single company could have made on its own. The label had already shifted once from DiNucci's Web Everywhere to O'Reilly's Web as Participation before most people had even heard it. Around the same time, two designers from Yahoo, Christian Crumlish and Erin Malone, were turning this into a working toolkit. They had built Yahoo's library of design patterns, and in 2009, they published Designing Social Interfaces, a catalog of more than 100 reusable building blocks: the profile, the activity stream, the ability to follow, voting and ratings, reputation scores, comments. If you have ever wondered why so many different sites in that era felt strangely alike, this is part of the answer. There was a shared parts bin, and social had become the name for the bin. On this definition, an interface is social when it carries the participation features. It has the profile, the friends, the feed, the like, the share. And this is the version of the word that escaped labs and design studios and reached the rest of us. And the reason behind that was because it was attached to things we used every day. When most people say social media, this is what they mean: not visibility and accountability, not the shape of a network, not phatic contact. It's the bundle. So by the end of 2000s, there were four answers in circulation. Social as mutual visibility from the cooperative work tradition. Social as visible shape of your connections from the network site scholars. Social as phatic contact from the anthropologists. And finally, social as participation bundle from the people building products. 4 communities, 4 definitions, all using one word. What happened next is that the fourth definition won, and it absorbed the other 3 as features. This is the part worth being careful about. It is very tempting to say the commercial version was fake and the others were real, and that is too clean. The honest account is more interesting. The participation bundle did not ignore the older definitions. In many places, it implemented them. The visible like count and the receipt are a form of the visibility and accountability that Erickson and Kellogg described. The friends list is the articulated network that Boyd and Ellison defined. The poke and the heart are the pure phatic contact. The bundle is, in large part, the 3 older definitions cast into reusable parts. But casting an idea into a part changes what it is for. Accountability in the social translucent sense was about people being answerable to each other. When it becomes a public follower count, the same visibility starts to serve a different master. You are still being seen, but the seeing is now measured, ranked, and fed back to you as a number that can go up or down. The visible network, which Boyd and Ellison described as a way of representing relationships you already had, becomes the engine that systems use to grow, because every articulated connection is a path along which the product can spread. The phatic contact, the cheap signal that keeps a relationship warm, becomes the unit of activity that gets counted, optimized, and sold to advertisers. None of the older meanings were thrown away. They were kept, and they were quietly reweighted. They were reweighted so that the same mechanisms that let people see and reach each other also produced the engagement and the data that the business ran on. The word stayed the same. What it was working for did not. There's a coda to this, and it involves a different word that arrived to sit on top of social. That word is platform. In 2010, a scholar, Tarleton Gillespie, then at Cornell, published a paper called The Politics of Platforms. He had noticed that the companies running these services had started, almost in unison, to call themselves platforms, and he wanted to know why that particular word. What he found is that platform is useful precisely because it means several things at once. It has a computational sense, a foundation that others build on. It has an everyday architectural sense. It has a figurative sense, a platform as a place from which you speak, a soapbox. And it has a political sense, a platform of positions and opportunity. A company that calls itself a platform gets to lean on all of these at the same time and to slide between them when convenient. To users, it offers a stage to speak from. To advertisers, it offers a foundation to build their business on. To regulators, it presents itself as neutral infrastructure, a mere surface, not responsible for what people put on it. Gillespie's point was that the word lets the company hold these stances together and play down the tension between them. It wants the credit for hosting all that expression, and it wants limited liability for what the expression turns out to be. Platform lets it ask for both at once. And this is exactly why the question, is it a platform, is never quite innocent. It sounds like a technical classification. It is partly a legal posture, and it sits on top of the same confusion we have been tracing. Because a service that calls itself a social platform is invoking 2 overloaded words in a row, each of them quietly doing more than one job. At the end of all this, where does it leave us? We now live inside the version that won. The participation bundle took the word. The older meanings were folded in as features, and they were bent towards other ends. Platform was laid over the top to manage what the law and the public are allowed to expect. So when people argue now about whether an app is really social, whether a feed is a public square or a broadcast channel, whether a service is a platform or a publisher, they're not failing to understand each other. They are each holding a different definition and treating it as the only one. The arguments do not resolve because the sides are not using the same word. One word, four possible meanings out of many, and no referee. This leaves social doing something odd for a word we lean on this often. When we reach for it now, most of us could not say which of the four we mean, and neither could the people who built the thing we are describing. It arrives sounding like a description of how something works, and turns out to be a question that has quietly been answered at least four different ways, all at once.